97.3 ESPN presents The Sports Bash with Mike Gill. It's time for Football at 4 with 97.3 ESPN.com's Andrew DiCecco. Powered by InsideTheBirds.com.
He's in! Touchdown!
Now, live from inside the Matt Black Kia Studios, it's Football at 4.
Football at 4, powered by the Inside the Birds podcast. It drops every Monday and Thursday morning. And, of course, on Fridays, we are joined throughout the year by Andrew DiCecco. Check out all of his work over at 97.3 ESPN.com. And Andrew joins us all guests doing the Boardwalk on the hotline. Jim Schwartz spoke today. What's going on with the Eagles roster? Could the Eagles maybe go out and sign a free agent wide receiver? We'll go into all of that and more now with Andrew. Andrew, welcome to a TGIF Friday.
What's going on, Josh? It's good to talk to you, man. It's been a while.
It has been a hot minute, absolutely. You know, between all the Sixers and Flyers coming back and, you know, the fact that, you know, the world keeps spinning around no matter what. But football keeps happening, and part of that happening was Jim Schwartz spoke today. First of all, it was good to see, you know, not as much has changed with Jim, as much as the world has changed around us, Jim Schwartz has not changed at all. And as always, he always gives some pretty brutally honest answers. And one of those things he talked about was, Andrew, there is a competition for the cornerback position opposite Darius Slay.
Yeah, Jim Schwartz today reaffirmed what we pretty much already knew, that there was going to be a battle there for that second cornerback spot. To me, you know, he left it open to even Rasul Douglas, but to be honest, I think it's going to come down to Avonte Maddox and Sidney Jones. And when you look at what each player brings to the table, Sidney Jones has the size and the length, and Avonte Maddox has the experience and the versatility. But they both have endured their shares of peaks and valleys, right? So Avonte Maddox has struggled on the outside with some bigger body wide receivers, but he's also performed well in certain spots. And Sidney Jones as well. You look at what he did down the stretch last season. He broke up that pass to Michael Gallup in the end zone to help the Eagles to propel them to win 17-9. He there, but you know, he might be coming down to his last opportunity here in Philadelphia to earn a starting spot, you know, given the opportunities that he's had. And you know, I think the Eagles in a perfect scenario would like for Sidney Jones to win that spot, because I think they really like Avonte Maddox as that positionless defensive player where they can put him on the outside in the slot at safety and move him around so Jim Schwartz can kind of deploy him however he sees fit. So, yeah, I think they're banking on Sidney Jones winning the spot. I just don't know how feasible that's going to be.
Well, that's interesting that you bring up the Avonte Maddox thing, because I was going to say, if Sidney Jones does win that outside spot, he's too good to just sit behind Sidney Jones and then sit behind Roby Coleman as well. So you would anticipate that he would still get a lot of playing time then.
Yeah, like you said, he's too good to keep on the sideline. I think that they would find a role for him, and I think that the fact that he can do so many different things kind of enables Jim Schwartz to get him on the field fairly often. So I think that that's kind of what I foresee their dream scenario being, so they can kind of move him around. Because Sidney Jones, he can only play on the outside. They've tried to put him in the slot before, it hasn't quite worked out. He's always a perimeter defender, so ideally, you know, you want him to just win that role, and you can use Avonte Maddox as a versatile chess piece.
You mentioned about Avonte Maddox being a versatile chess piece. So, and I'm just throwing out a scenario. If there's a situation where they need someone to move around, whether it's because someone gets injured or maybe someone tests positive for COVID-19 or someone plays poorly or whatever the situation may be, how would you think the Eagles handle it? Let's say Avonte Maddox did win that position, but then they needed to move somewhere else. You know, how do you think the Eagles would handle that, considering the fact that wasn't part of the reason why the roster was set up the way it was for multiple safeties, multiple slot corners, but then you got to take your primary outside guy away? Doesn't that affect some of the way you built up the rest of the roster?
Yeah, it definitely will, and that comes with the, you know, Avonte Maddox being a positionless player. You're able to shift a guy like a Sidney Jones or a Rasul Douglas there, or, you know, even a Jalen Mills. Their safeties that they have, they're very versatile. Outside of Rodney McLeod, Jalen Mills can play corner. Will Parks can play corner. He has played corner at a decently high level for the Broncos. And Kayvon Wallace can move around as well. So I think that that they kind of fit the mold as what Jim Schwartz is really looking for in a defensive back. And because of what you said, because there's all these different variables that you have to account for going into a season. And I think that they've kind of assembled that what Jim Schwartz is looking for in his defensive backs.
What are your takeaways after learning that Lane Johnson, Nate Gerry, and Jordan Mailata are on the COVID-19 list?
Well, my takeaway is that, there's going to be a lot more players. I think that's going to happen to, you look around the league and see how common that's becoming. I believe the Buffalo Bills sent their entire rookie class home because there was 5 rookies that tested positive for COVID-19. I anticipate every team having a few, and, it's not really a surprise.
Now, you say it's not a surprise. We know what's going on with baseball right now, and this is something I've asked Jeff Mosher, and we touched on with Adam Kaplan a little bit yesterday, but I want to get your perspective as well. What can the NFL learn from baseball basically just stumbling and fumbling over themselves? I mean, baseball basically went to the start line with their shoes tied wrong, and they got halfway down the race, and they tripped and fell in the grass.
Yeah, Major League Baseball is a prime example of what poor planning, kind of leads to. And I think that, the NFL, because they're getting a later start, they're kind of able to see what the Major League did wrong and what they can kind of do better as far as protocols. And I think you're seeing, they're implementing these multiple 2 or 3 times they need to be tested. And there's certain protocols that are in place for the NFL to, be a little bit safer. Granted, they can't do the bubble concept that the NBA is doing because of the, the roster sizes and the coaching staff and the medical staff. So that can't happen. But, I think that, they have a plan in place. I just don't know how realistic it's going to be able to get through a full slate of games this season. So
I would ask you this. Do you feel like they can make this work? Do you really feel like there is a possibility to make sure they get through a 16-game season?
Well, Hunter, I think that the season will start on time. I just don't know how realistic it's going to be to finish it because of the nature of football. You're hitting each other for an hour. You got blood, sweat, transferring, and, the close quarters of a locker room. You can social distance as much as you want. But, as far as the sport itself, it's kind of impossible to really be able to abide by those guidelines throughout for an entire season.
With that being said, isn't part of the, and again, I'm not trying to, dismiss what was just said and what you guys are talking about, but I keep looking at this as if we're testing everybody, right? And we clear everybody and be like, you're clear, you're good to go, not just for every day in practice, but for Sundays as well. Shouldn't that ensure that the people who are walking in the competition are clear, similar to what other sports have been doing outside of baseball, where it's everyone's being tested. Everyone who walks onto the field, onto the court, onto the ice, they're all in the clear, so you should be safe and okay.
Yeah, in theory that works, but then there's always the asymptomatic players and things like that you can't really account for. So, like I was saying, it's kind of almost impossible to get through an entire season with no positive tests. After you get the initial ones out of the way. So I think that when you look at it, it's pretty difficult. I think it's, like I said, I think they'll be able to get it off on time, and I do think the protocols are in place. It's just the nature of the sport, I think, might be a little bit more challenging than some may realize.
What do you think about the hyper restrictions with some of those protocols? The fact that guys could be suspended, guys could be fined, potentially maybe even lose close to a game check if they violate certain things off the field. Do you think that's a strong enough deterrent, or do you think it doesn't matter?
I think I like the fact that they were so strict on some of on the parameters. You can't go. I believe it's you can't go to a restaurant and sit inside. You can't go to a nightclub, obviously, and there's some strict things that are in place there. There's going to be some guys that won't kind of abide by those rules, and I think you'll see a lot of younger guys that probably will because they don't want to risk getting fined or anything like that. But they really make it so that you literally go to practice and you go to your hotel and that's it. They don't really want you going. They made it very clear, you can't do any groups, I believe, of more than 15 people and things like that. So I don't think you'll see a lot of young players really try to stretch that boundary. I think maybe some of the veterans may.
How do you think all of these players opting out impacts the league's ideas?
I think it impacts their ideas somewhat, but I think it'll take a bigger name player to really opt out for them to really take a step back and look at what they need to do, because I mean there already has been some decent names that Dante Hightower, Damian Williams, the running back for the Chiefs, that have opted out, and eventually I think you need to look at it and be like, okay, there are legitimate concerns here. You're getting a lot of guys that are opting not to play. You get some guys that have health reasons, and some guys that family concerns that they're just not going to play. And I think they need to look at it. And once the numbers, if the numbers become too much, too great, too out of hand, where you're kind of going to sacrifice the product on the field, I think they really need to look at it and maybe consider their options.
Well, one of those players was Marquise Goodwin. So how does this change the depth chart of the Eagles wide receiving core?
I think it does change the landscape a little bit. I consider Marquise Goodwin as an under the radar player that I thought could have a decent impact on the team. Not necessarily that he'd be a starter, but he'd be a backup to replace Deshaun Jackson should he miss any time due to injury. And when you look at what the Eagles have right now, you don't have Alshon Jeffrey. He's on the PUP as he's nursing that, and he's working his way back from the Liz Frank injury. You don't have Marquise Goodwin, so you have Deshaun Jackson, and your next veteran receiver is Greg Ward, who has 28 catches to his name. I think that, the Eagles could go for a low-cost option on the free agent market to add some speed in there, maybe a Taylor Gabriel, maybe a Paul Richardson, or maybe even a Tavon Austin. But I do think that you need to bring a veteran in there just to have that, whether or not they make the team or not is it's ultimately going to be up to them. But, you can get one of these guys in there on a low-cost option, and you kind of see what they can do. Marquise Goodwin wasn't a sure thing to make the roster anyway, but I think, when you look at there's just the sheer depth of the receiver position right now, you just have Deshaun Jackson and a bunch of young players that really haven't proven anything in the NFL. So you really should bring a guy in there, and I think they will.
Andrew DiCecco joining us here on the Boardwalk kind of hotline on 97.3 ESPN Football at 4, powered by InsideTheBirds.com. Make sure you're following Andrew on Twitter at DiCecco NFL. Also check out his articles over at 97.3 ESPN.com, where he breaks down the guys that he just mentioned, Paul Richardson, Tavon Austin, and Taylor Gabriel, as potential options for the Eagles. Now, Andrew, forgive me, but I'm going to push back on you a little bit. I feel like the guys you just named there, aren't those guys more so slot receivers than outside receivers? And don't the Eagles, if they were to lose Deshaun Jackson or Alshon Jeffrey has a setback or anything else happens, don't they need more outside guys than inside guys?
Yes, they do. But when you look at what the Marquise Goodwin's role would have been, he would have been a slot receiver. Paul Richardson has played on the outside in the past. And Tavon Austin is one of those guys you can kind of line up everywhere. Obviously, you don't want to put him on the perimeter, but he can be a movable offensive weapon out of the backfield and things of that nature. But yeah, they do have a problem there at the X receiver position. They only have J.J. Arcega-Whiteside and also Rob Davis, who a lot of people forget about. He actually, the door is somewhat open for him to maybe steal one of those final roster spots, because they need to have some size. They don't have anybody with size outside of Alshon Jeffrey and JJ. I mean, John Hightower, I believe, is just over 6 foot as well. So you can see that they have a large contingent of undersized receivers, but a lot of speed.
Now, you mentioned the fact that guys like Tavon Austin can play over the field. Well, we know that the Eagles want to play Jalen Reagor all over the field. We know Reagor said that he's been studying multiple positions. The Eagles believe that he has a high enough football IQ to be able to do different things. What do you think would have to happen with no NFL preseason, training camp not even starting for a couple weeks? What would have to happen in training camp with guys like Reagor, Watkins, and Hightower for the Eagles to turn around and say, we absolutely have to go out and get somebody else?
Well, that would obviously be a worst case scenario. The conversations that I've had with Sonny Cumbie, who was Jalen Reagor's offensive coordinator at TCU, he reiterated that he is a quick study, he's a quick learner, and that he would grasp whatever system he's thrust into fairly quickly. So I'm not really concerned about Jalen Reagor, and the best thing for him is reps, and he's going to get a lot of them right now with not a lot of guys, not a lot of other options there. But when you look at John Hightower and Quez Watkins, those are two players that, yeah, they have a lot of enticing speed, but they are both incredibly raw in many areas of their game. John Hightower spent his first 2 years at a junior college, Hines Community College, and he really needs to get stronger, add some size, really learn how to compete for the football in the air, but he does have intriguing physical attributes. Quez Watkins is another guy. He's more so built for the slot, but he also has a lot of speed there. I don't know how much those guys are going to get to really show in these, 4 or 5 weeks to really kind of give the Eagles a lot of confidence that they have, enough guys in place that can step right in and play, whether it be week 1, week 2, or week 3. I think that they do need that. That's one of the main reasons why I think they need to go out and add a veteran just to kind of bolster that unit.
I'm going to compare this to the Sixers real quick. Shake Milton was thrown into the starting lineup that never played together, and we are expecting this starting 5 to just work out and make this playoff run. And I know Jalen Reagor was a first-round pick, so it is a little bit different. But is it fair to expect so much out of Jalen Reagor? It seems like his role is going to be more important as we keep learning new things, like Marquise Goodwin not being available. So, is it fair to expect this much out of Jalen Reagor right now with the whole COVID-19 not really having an actual camp?
Yeah, I think I encourage fans to temper their expectations with Jalen Reagor. He's, given the abbreviated offseason, given that he's, like you said, he's kind of thrust into the deep end here, and really he's going to be a starter because they don't have any other options. But I think that he is unique, and more so than a lot of rookies, because he's not one of those traditional wide receivers that you really need to force feed the ball to on the outside or in the inside. You can get him the ball on jet sweeps. You can get him the ball on screen passes, and he can impact the offense that way, where he's able to manufacture yards and take advantage of his ability in space. So he will make his plays, but I encourage fans not to put too much on his plate right now because, like you said, there's only a handful of weeks where he can really get that continuity with the offense, and then he's kind of hit the ground running.
One guy we haven't touched on yet, and I would love to know your perspective on this guy, is we haven't really talked about J.J. Arcega-Whiteside much yet. I mean, this is a guy who, when he was drafted, he was coming off of some crazy production at Stanford. He was arguably the most, productive red zone target at least in the Pac-12 his last 2 years at Stanford, and he's a guy who really hasn't been able to play up to expectation. He only had the 1 year last year. So, where does J-Jaw fall into all of this that's going on?
That's a great question because, when you look at the wide receiving core, he's one of the guys that you just don't hear about. But he's going to be he's more than likely going to be a starter. Like I said, he's the only other X besides Alshon Jeffrey, also Rob Davis. But he's going to have to play on the outside. He's going to have to step up and, really take that next step in his progression and be that red zone target that they drafted him to be. Now, will he ever be a burner? Is he ever going to create that separation? Probably not. That's not in his wheelhouse. But what you saw on film was his ability to kind of elevate high points of football and play that above the rim style of play. Now, last season he dealt with some injuries and probably some confidence issues. And you saw in that podcast where he mentioned that he would go into his game day weeks and not really know what position. He was kind of the information overload. He didn't really know where he was lining up. So I think this year, you get a new wide receiver coach in Aaron Moorhead, who played the game before, has a different presence in the meeting room, and kind of is able to really see what he's good at and work him into the offense. I think you'll see a new J.J. Arcega-Whiteside in 2020.
Did anything stand out to you when Carson Wentz spoke yesterday? I know he mentioned that he was thinking of opting out with the new baby. So did anything stand out to you?
No, nothing really. It's just more so that he really had this offseason that he was able to focus on, getting better, lifting weights. You saw how much bigger he looked. He was kind of, instead of, focusing his attention on rehab, he was more so able to focus on preparing himself for the 2020 season. That's one thing that really stuck out to me. And I think that when you look at you look at him getting slighted and everything, I think he's really going to, emerge this year and leave no doubt in anyone's mind that he's a premier quarterback in the NFL.
Andrew DiCecco joining us here at Football at 4, powered by Inside the Birds, the podcast. Also check out everything Andrew's got going on at 97.3 ESPN.com. He wrote about 3 veteran receivers the Eagles could bring in to fill the void without Marquise Goodwin. Also, he wrote about what Jim Schwartz had to say to the media today about the cornerback and defensive back positions. Andrew, I want to stay on the offense with you, though. Deuce Stanley also talked about the running backs. He has some interesting things to say about some of the guys that you have talked about here on 97.3 ESPN, specifically guys like Killins and Warren.
Yeah, Killins is a fun player, Josh. I got to see him at the East West Shrine Bowl. I'm not sure if I mentioned this to you or if I mentioned it to Mike or Hunter, but he was one of those guys where I walked past him on the field after the game, and I barely noticed him. I thought he was someone that was working, working this like a staff member or something because he was so small. I believe he was only 5'7", 160 pounds. But he's electrifying. He's very fast. I think he had 90 yards receiving in that game, if I'm not mistaken. I remember sitting in the press box looking at somebody. I was like, that kid, he's not going to get drafted, but he'll be in someone's camp and he'll have a chance to make the team. Now, those chances are very small now, given everything that's transpired over this few months. But I mean, he's a fast guy. He can impact the return game. I just don't know how many reps he's going to get this summer. A guy who I really like, who I've talked about a lot about, is Mike Warren. I think Mike Warren really fits the profile of that bigger, bruising running back that the Eagles really don't have on their roster right now. I think he has a little bit more of a higher ceiling than a Corey Clement. He can catch the ball a little bit. He can run downhill, and he doesn't have much tread on the tire, and he doesn't have quite as lengthy of an injury history. And if he returned to the college game this year, everyone's talking about Mike Warren as being, one of the top running backs in college football. So I think the Eagles got a steal there. I just hope that he gets a fair opportunity to show what he can do.
Now, you said a fair opportunity. I'm really curious what that is, though, because with no preseason games and the limitations of a training camp, how are you really going to evaluate running backs, considering the fact that, at least in my opinion, I feel like live game action sometimes is the only way to evaluate some of these running backs because of the real world circumstances of third downs and plays not going right, how the young player responds in those situations. We're not getting that. So how can we evaluate a guy like Warren in order for him to prove he deserves to be on the roster?
Right. This year is going to be, because it's so unprecedented, I think that you're going to see a lot of coaches that really rely on their college tape because they don't have much to go off of. Also, another thing that they're going to really have to, impress in order to win the coach's attention, they're going to have to impress in the film room. If they're getting grilled with questions, you got to answer. You got to know where you're supposed to be, and you have to know your pass blocking responsibilities. And I think you can really impress coaches that way. But they find themselves in just the same position as all the other young players. Corey Clement is in a similar position, and he's played before. It's really going to be interesting to see how some of these young guys are able to rise through this adversity and claim a roster spot. Because I'm telling you, man, there's some talented undrafted players that the Eagles came away with, and it would be a shame to see them, not really get a fair shake and find themselves on the outside looking in. He's
Andrew DiCecco. Check him out on Twitter at @DiCecco NFL. Check out all of his Eagles coverage over at 97.3 ESPN.com. He joins us every Tuesday and Friday here on the Sports Bash. Football at 4, powered by the Inside the Birds podcast. And as all guests, he appeared on the Boardwalk Honda Hotline. Andrew, I'm not going to ask you what you're drinking this weekend because I don't know as much beer as Mike Gill does, so I'm not going to even try to embarrass myself.
Fair enough.
Have a good one, my friend.
You too. Take care.